Welcome back to software engineering. I'm not going to talk at you too much today because you've got a lot to do in your in-class portion. Today you're going to review somebody else's requirements document and see, how well they did. As part of that process, I'm going to have you do a little bit of requirements discovery for them. Maybe you can do a little bit for your own team after, next class when we wrap this up. So let's talk about requirements discovering. So far we've gone over some of these things, the functional and non-functional requirements, the requirements engineering process. Now we're in product elicitation. Now we're in requirements elicitation. So we talked about requirements engineering a little, process of establishing that requirements document, establishing all the services and the constraints of the system, getting all of that defined. So basically we kind of understand that process already. I think we probably understand what a requirement is. I think I got reset back to the top, didn't I? Yeah, I was wondering why that stuff was going through again. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, we left off here. We were talking about discovery, classifying, organizing, prioritizing, negotiation, and then specification. We're at the discovery phase right now. And notice that's a cycle that just continues. So discovery. Discovery occurs when we interact with stakeholders to discover what they want. Obviously, the biggest stakeholder is usually the person paying us, our customer. We've already had a lot of interaction with them to see what they want. But there are many other stakeholders too, as we're going to find out in a second. Then we've got to classify and organize those. We've got to negotiate with the customer, resolve any conflicts between our different stakeholders. And then we got to document those requirements as we've been doing, generate that requirements document, and then go back into the next phase and see if we can discover some more and repeat that process until we're satisfied, basically, or until our product is finished. So discovery is the process of gathering information about the systems that are going to be required and those user and system requirements that are going to derive from what our stakeholders want. So interacting with the system are a bunch of stakeholders, managers, external regulators, end users, all kinds of different people, and they all have their own desires. How do we figure out their desires? Well, we interview them. We do direct interviews with the customer, we talk to them, but with all other stakeholders we do focus groups, we do closed interviews, we do open interviews. So in a closed interview, we might have a predetermined list of questions that we want to ask specific stakeholders. In an open interview, maybe we want to have an open-ended discussion and see what they want. Maybe we just want to talk to them open-endedly. When you're interviewing people who are stakeholders and you want to figure out what they want, obviously you've got to be open-minded. Avoid your preconceived ideas. This is something that I find is very hard for developers. They think, well, this is the way to do it because this is the way I know how to do it. That's not necessarily what the people using the system want. And you've got to be open to the kinds of demands that they have. Don't come in there with any preconceived ideas of what the application is going to look like. And then expect the person you're asking to be completely in agreement with those. You definitely want to come up with some questions to prompt people. If you just sit down with folks and you ask them, all right, I'm making a game that's like battleships but with waffles. What would you like? They're not going to have anything to tell you about that. I'm making a tokamak nuclear reaction simulator. What do you think it should look like? They're not going to have any answers to that. You've got to come up with questions to get the discussion going. Because otherwise you're not going to really get anywhere. And as this is an iterative process, once you get further along, once you have a prototype that you can actually show them, instead of both of you having to work on your imagination, it's going to be a lot easier to get more information out of your stakeholders. So in practice, there's some closed and open-ended questions in any interview, or a mix of closed and open-ended interviews with different people. Interviews are good for getting an overall understanding, not particularly for getting into too many of the specifics. You got to be open-minded again, and you want to prompt the user by suggesting things that you're going to put in. A or B options are great. Would you like this? Would you like that? Would you prefer this over that? Those kinds of questions are very helpful for getting to the bottom of what your stakeholders want. But there's problems with interviews, obviously. So people who are specialists in something, talk about tokamak nuclear fusion reactor simulator, You're going to be talking probably to nuclear physicists, for example. As a developer, you don't understand any of that. So maybe even the terminology that they use is foreign. It doesn't have to be nuclear physicists. It can be doctors, nurses, finance people, managers, millennials and Zoomers alike all have their own language that is difficult to understand. So not just slang, but also just terminology used in industry, jargon, that kind of thing. And then, of course, the detailed parts of every industry that you don't understand as a software developer. So interviews are not great for understanding these domain-specific requirements. You, a developer and a requirements engineer, probably can't understand that terminology. It's not like you're going to go to college real quick and figure out how to become a lawyer or a doctor or a nuclear physicist within the span of one project. You are going to learn a lot about whatever domain that you're working in, generally speaking, but you're not going to be able to become an expert. And then some people, when they're talking about their domain knowledge, they forget that you're not an expert. And that's a very common thing. They'll use acronyms you don't know, terms you don't understand, or they'll just not articulate things that they think are too simple or too straightforward. And then you'll end up missing requirements because you missed the most basic thing, the thing that they didn't even think was worth explaining to you. Which leads us to ethnography, not necessarily a popular approach because from the description you'll see that it's rather expensive. Ethnography is just a fancy term for following people around, basically. Something like anthropology, but not for foreign cultures, for foreign organizations. So ethnography is just basically being a social scientist, and rather than talking to people, you just follow them around and watch what they do and see how you can make their life easier. So not particularly an option in this class, but something to keep in mind if you can pull it off somehow. Usually you get a more rich understanding of the requirements that a person has for a piece of software when you follow them around and see what it is that that software is trying to help them to do better. So if you're viewing the process that they're trying to improve, it's much easier to come up with software that improves it than if you're just asking them about it. Requirements that are derived from the way people actually work rather than the way which process. That is such a typo. Come on, Somerville. Suggest that they ought to work. Requirements that are derived from cooperation, awareness of other people's activities. So be aware of what other people are doing. Gives you some empathy. It shows you how they're living their life and how you can make it better. Ethnographic can be effective for understanding existing processes, but not so great for adding new features. Just because you follow them around and you've seen what their problem is, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've identified every great way to fix it. So sometimes interviews can be more effective here because, again, as a not domain expert, you can follow someone around and see what they do all day, but then how do you actually fix their problem? Well, they probably know better than you do. So definitely advantages both ways. Focused ethnography, skip that. A nice little flow chart again. So something you want to do a little ethnographic analysis, do a debrief, do some focused prototype. A lot of arrows here, very fancy. Don't care. And then next time we're going to talk a little bit more about user stories, which are very useful in agile models. But since we're doing interviews, you can start to think about these user stories today. Scenarios and user stories are very popular in agile requirements engineering. A user story is basically just a little tale, maybe fictional, maybe non-fictional, depending on whether you found somebody. But you're trying to paint a picture of what the life of a user working on the system that you're building would be like. And you basically just write a story about a person or a stakeholder using your system for some particular task. And because the story is based on a particular practical task that your stakeholder is actually going to do, they can relate to that story and they can point out perhaps where your story is inconsistent, where it can be improved upon, where the story could be better if your system were to behave differently. I think they have an example here, but it's very long. We're not going to read the whole thing, but let's read a little bit of it. So, Jack is a primary school teacher in Ullapool, a village in northern Scotland. He has decided that a class project should be focused around the fishing industry in the area. So see, they're writing a story. Maybe Jack's a real person. Maybe he's not. Maybe Ullapool's a real city. Maybe it's not. It doesn't matter. Let's get to the part where it interacts with the iLearn software. So skippity, pupils use an iLearn wiki to gather together fishing stories, and Scran, a history resources site, to access newspaper archives and photographs. However, Jack also needs a photo sharing site, so we're dictating his problem there, yada yada yada, how the system solves the problem, how Jack interacts with it. Wonderful things happen, and then he uses the iLearn setup service to add kids take pics to the services seen by the pupils in his class, so that when they log in, they can immediately use the system to upload photos from their mobile devices. Great, so now we have a general idea of how this software would work for a person in a real situation. So think about user stories as well when you are interviewing the people that you want to interview. And scenario is basically the same thing, but with more structure. A scenario, in addition to telling the fictional story, also has some of that extra information around it documented more specifically. So you would describe the situation that they're in, you would describe the normal flow of events, so the way the story should go, and then it's kind of like a choose-your-own-adventure book. You might branch out into the different ways the story can go wrong and what could happen in those situations. So a scenario is just like a more contrived user story. You've got a more description of the situation, and then you've also got these branching paths, so you might have a cool kind of scenario document that reaches into different directions, again, very much like a choose-your-own-adventure book. You might even describe activities that are happening concurrently. Maybe you would cross-reference them to other stories or scenarios, and then you would have some description of what everything looks like when it's all over. So, very interesting. Okay, but more on that next time. Just something to think about this time as you are potentially doing some focus group interviews. All right, go ahead and get started on your task for today. Share your requirements document with the team below you by posting it in their chat. So just post the finished requirements document with the team below you in Discord. If you're the last team, you obviously share it with the team on top. So you post your requirements document in their chat. They should make a copy and work from that, so don't let them edit your Google Doc. If you have Google Doc, have them make a copy and put their notes on that. They're going to make some notes, try to accumulate a certain number of points for corrections. They're going to try to make the most bad faith possible interpretation of your system that they can. And then you guys are going to talk to one another about what you uncovered. So when you've finished reviewing the other teams, go post in their chat that you're ready to talk to them. When somebody posts that they're ready to talk to you, go ahead and try to stop what you're doing as soon as you can and go and meet with them. When you're done, you can wrap up what you were doing and then post to your team that you are ready to meet with them, the team that you're reviewing, that you're ready to meet with them. So if both of you post ready at the exact same time, I leave it to you to work out. Hopefully that won't happen. The reason we have to do it this way is that we have an odd number of teams, so someone will always be left out. So this way, whoever gets ready first at least gets to finish their review first. So that's lovely. All right, that's it. See you guys in Discord. If you have any more questions about how it works, please let me know. And don't forget to share your requirements document with the channel below you so they can get started.